The SS Serenity stretched out before me like a floating city, her pristine white hull gleaming in the Miami morning sun. At 1,200 feet long and 18 decks high, she was one of the most luxurious cruise ships in the world, a masterpiece of engineering and design that could house 4,000 passengers in unparalleled comfort. From the captain's deck where I stood, I could see the last of the supplies being loaded through the massive cargo doors, the crew making final preparations for what would be a 7-day journey through the Caribbean. Captain Morrison stood beside me, his weathered hands folded behind his back as he surveyed his domain with the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent 40 years at sea. At 63, he was everything you'd want in a ship's captain: competent, experienced, and utterly unflappable in any crisis. "The weather looks perfect for departure, Ms. Martinez," he said in his crisp British accent. "Light winds, calm seas, and sunshine as far as the eye can see. Your guest should have a magnificent voyage." I nodded, though my attention was focused on my phone, where a text message from my father had just appeared on the screen. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I should have expected them. "The cruise is family only. There's no cabin for you. We've already finalized the guest list and there's simply no room. Sorry. Maybe next time." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the familiar sting of exclusion that had defined my relationship with my family for the past 5 years. Here I was standing on the bridge of a ship worth $800 million, a ship that I owned, reading a text from my father telling me I wasn't welcome on my parents' 35th anniversary celebration. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Captain Morrison asked, noticing my expression. "Just family drama," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "My parents are celebrating their anniversary with a cruise, and apparently there's no room for me." Captain Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. He'd been my employee for 3 years, ever since I'd purchased the Serenity and 2 other luxury cruise ships, but this was the first time he'd heard about my personal family situation. "I see," he said diplomatically. "Would you like me to review the passenger manifest? Perhaps we could make arrangements." "Actually," I said, holding up my phone, "could you show me the passenger list for the Martinez anniversary party?" Captain Morrison walked over to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "Of course. The Martinez Group has reserved the entire Platinum deck. That's our most exclusive level. 12 luxury suites, each with private balconies and butler service. Quite an impressive booking, actually. The deposit alone was $200,000. He handed me the passenger list and I scanned the names with growing irritation. My parents, Eduardo and Carmen Martinez. My brother Miguel and his wife Sofia. My sister Patricia and her husband David. My uncle Roberto and Aunt Elena. My cousins and their spouses. 24 family members total, all enjoying a week-long luxury cruise to celebrate my parents' marriage. Everyone except me." "Impressive group," Captain Morrison commented, looking over my shoulder. "The Martinez family must be quite successful to afford this kind of celebration. The total cost for the week, including the suite rentals, private dining, and exclusive shore excursions, comes to nearly $800,000. $800,000. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family was spending nearly $1 million to exclude me from their celebration, not knowing that every penny of that money was flowing directly into my bank account. "Captain," I said slowly, "what would happen if a passenger's booking were to be cancelled?" Captain Morrison's eyes sparkled with understanding. "Well, ma'am, if a booking were cancelled, the passengers would need to disembark at the next port. Standard maritime law requires us to ensure all passengers have valid reservations and payment confirmations." "I see. And how would such a cancellation be communicated?" "The ship's security chief would handle it personally. Very discreet, very professional. The passengers would be informed that their booking had been cancelled and they would need to make alternative arrangements." I looked back down at my phone where another text from my father had just appeared. "Don't take it personally, Isabella. This is just for immediate family. You understand. Don't take it personally. Right. Being deliberately excluded from my parents' anniversary celebration wasn't personal at all." "Captain Morrison," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest, "I think we need to review some bookings." "Of course, Ms. Martinez. Which bookings would you like me to examine?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my brother Miguel's name, and I briefly considered not answering. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello, Miguel. Isabella. Thank God you answered. His voice was slightly breathless, tinged with excitement and maybe a little guilt. Listen, I know Dad texted you about the cruise and I wanted to call personally to explain. Explain what exactly? Well, you know how Dad is about these big family events. He wants everything to be perfect and he thought that with such a small ship, adding more people might make things cramped. I almost laughed out loud. Small ship? The Serenity could house 4,000 passengers and they had 24 people. Miguel, it's a cruise ship, not a rowboat. I know, but you know Dad. He gets these ideas in his head. Plus, to be honest, the cost is astronomical. We're talking about nearly $1 million for the week. Dad didn't want to put any financial pressure on you. There it was again. The assumption that I couldn't afford their lifestyle, that I needed to be protected from financial reality. 5 years of this treatment, 5 years of being treated like the family charity case who needed shielding from expensive family events. How considerate of him, I said dryly. Look, Isabella, I feel terrible about this. We all do. But Dad already paid the deposits and the ship is fully booked. There literally isn't room for another passenger. I looked around the bridge of my $800 million ship, with its capacity for 4,000 guests, and marveled at my brother's ability to deliver complete fiction with such conviction. The ship is fully booked? I repeated. Completely. Dad tried to add you last minute, but they said it was impossible. You know how exclusive these luxury cruises are. Right. Exclusive. Maybe we can plan something else for Christmas? A nice dinner somewhere, nothing too expensive. We'll make it up to you, I promise. Nothing too expensive. Because, of course, I couldn't afford anything expensive. Miguel, I said carefully, before I let you go, can you tell me the name of the cruise line? Azure Seas Luxury Cruises. Apparently they're the best in the business. This ship, the SS Serenity, is supposed to be absolutely incredible. Dad spent months researching luxury cruise lines to find the perfect one. I'm sure he did. The staff, the amenities, the food, everything is supposed to be world-class. Dad said he wanted Mom to have the celebration she deserved, no matter what it cost. No matter what it cost. Except the cost of including his daughter, apparently. That sounds wonderful, Miguel. I hope you all have a great time. We will. And Isabella? Don't be upset about this. You know we love you, right? This isn't about that. Of course not. After I hung up, I stood in silence for a moment, processing the conversation. My family was about to embark on a luxury cruise aboard my ship, having spent nearly $1 million for the privilege of excluding me, all while assuming I couldn't afford to join them anyway. The situation was so absurd it was almost funny. Almost. Captain Morrison, I said, turning back to him, I'd like to review our passenger policies regarding cancelled bookings. Certainly, ma'am. What specifically would you like to know? If a booking were cancelled due to, say, irregularities in payment or documentation, how would the passengers be handled? Captain Morrison pulled out a thick manual and flipped to the relevant section. According to maritime law and company policy, passengers with cancelled bookings must disembark at the next available port. They would be given 24 hours notice when possible, and the ship's staff would assist with alternative travel arrangements. And where is our first port of call? Nassau, Bahamas. We dock there tomorrow afternoon for a 6-hour shore excursion. Perfect. I looked back down at the passenger list, scanning the names of family members who had decided I wasn't worthy of inclusion in their celebration. Captain, I'd like you to prepare cancellation notices for the Martinez party. All of them, ma'am? I considered this for a moment. Part of me wanted to cancel every single booking, to leave them all stranded in Nassau while I sailed away in luxury. But that seemed unnecessarily cruel even for people who had hurt me so deeply. Not all of them, I said finally. Just my parents, my brother Miguel and my sister Patricia. The ones who made the decision to exclude me. Very good, ma'am. I'll have the documentation prepared immediately. And Captain, I'd like to personally deliver the news. Captain Morrison's eyes widened slightly. Ma'am, that's highly unusual. Typically, the security chief handles these situations to maintain passenger relations. I'm sure it is unusual. But these aren't typical passengers, are they? Understanding dawned in his eyes. No, ma'am, they certainly are not. As Captain Morrison began preparing the cancellation notices, I walked to the window and looked down at the dock below. Passengers were beginning to board, their excitement palpable even from 18 decks up. Families, couples, groups of friends, all embarking on what they expected to be the vacation of a lifetime. And somewhere among them would be my family, celebrating 35 years of marriage without the daughter they'd decided wasn't important enough to include. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from my sister Patricia. Isabella, I hope you're not upset about the cruise. Dad really did try to find room for you, but these luxury ships have such limited capacity. Maybe we can plan a nice dinner when we get back? Somewhere within your budget, of course. Within my budget. The phrase hit me like a slap. These people who assumed I was struggling financially were about to learn exactly what my budget could accommodate. I walked back to Captain Morrison's desk, where he was preparing official-looking documents with the ship's seal and letterhead. The cancellation notices are ready, Ms. Martinez, he said, handing me 3 envelopes. Each contains an explanation of the booking cancellation and instructions for disembarkation procedures. I took the envelopes, each one bearing the name of a family member who had decided I wasn't worth including in their celebration. The weight of them felt significant, like I was holding the power to completely upend their carefully planned anniversary cruise. Captain, one more question. What's the policy on refunds for cancelled bookings? For cancellations due to passenger misconduct or documentation issues, there are typically no refunds. The passengers are responsible for their own alternative travel arrangements and accommodations. So they would lose the entire $800,000? Plus any additional expenses for hotels, flights, and meals until they can arrange transportation home. I nodded slowly, understanding the full scope of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about embarrassment or inconvenience. This was about nearly $1 million in lost vacation expenses and the complete disruption of their anniversary celebration. Ms. Martinez, Captain Morrison said gently, are you certain you want to proceed with this? Once the cancellation notices are delivered, there's no reversing the decision. I thought about 5 years of family gatherings where I'd been treated like the poor relation. 5 years of comments about my lifestyle, my clothes, my financial situation. 5 years of being excluded from expensive family events because they assumed I couldn't afford them. 5 years of being made to feel like I didn't belong in my own family. I'm certain, I said, tucking the envelopes into my purse. The boarding process had begun in earnest now, and I could see passengers streaming up the gangways with their luggage and excitement. Somewhere in that crowd were my parents, probably marveling at the luxury of the ship they'd booked for their celebration. I took the elevator down to the main passenger deck, where the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Families were taking photos, couples were exploring the ship's amenities, and children were pressing their faces against windows to get a better view of the ocean. The platinum deck was accessible only by a private elevator that required a special key card. As the owner of the ship, I had master access to every area, including the exclusive suites that my family had rented for their celebration. The elevator rose smoothly to deck 16, and when the doors opened I stepped into a world of understated luxury. The platinum deck featured only 12 suites, each one larger than most people's apartments, with floor-to-ceiling windows, private balconies, and butler service around the clock. I could hear voices coming from the central lounge area, a lavishly appointed space with leather furniture, a full bar, and panoramic views of the ocean. My family had gathered there for what appeared to be a pre-dinner cocktail reception, their laughter and conversation carrying down the hallway. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the sound of their voices, the cancellation notices burning like fire in my purse. The lounge was even more impressive than I remembered from the ship's design phase. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over Italian leather furniture, and the panoramic windows offered breathtaking views of Miami's skyline. My family was scattered around the space in elegant evening wear, champagne glasses in hand, their faces glowing with excitement and satisfaction. Mom looked radiant in a navy blue cocktail dress, her silver hair swept into an elegant updo. At 60 she was still a beautiful woman, though I could see the subtle signs of the plastic surgery she'd had done over the years. Dad stood beside her in a custom tuxedo, his arm around her waist, looking every inch the successful businessman who could afford to spend $1 million on his wife's anniversary celebration. Isabella. Mom's voice cut through the ambient conversation as she spotted me in the doorway. What are you doing here? The entire lounge fell silent. 24 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, their expressions ranging from confusion to embarrassment to outright annoyance. "I came to deliver some important information," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Dad stepped forward, his face flushed with what might have been anger or embarrassment. "Isabella, I thought I made it clear that this cruise was for immediate family only. How did you even get aboard?" "I have my ways," I said, pulling out the first envelope. "But before we discuss that, I have some documents that I think you'll find interesting." "What kind of documents?" Miguel asked, moving to stand beside our parents. His wife Sophia remained seated, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. "Booking cancellations," I said simply, handing Dad the first envelope. He took it with obvious reluctance, his eyes scanning my face for some clue about what was happening. The envelope bore the official Azure Seas Luxury Cruises letterhead and his name in formal script. "What is this?" he asked, though his voice suggested he already suspected the answer wouldn't be good. "Open it and see." Dad tore open the envelope with hands that had started to tremble slightly. As he read the contents, his face went through several color changes before settling on a pale gray that matched his hair. "This says our booking has been cancelled," he said, his voice barely audible. "That's correct." "Cancelled?" Mom asked, moving to read over his shoulder. "What do you mean, cancelled?" I handed Miguel and Patricia their envelopes, watching their faces as they processed the information. The color drained from Miguel's face as he read, while Patricia made a sound like air escaping from a balloon. "This is impossible," Patricia said, her voice rising with panic. "We paid $800,000 for this cruise. They can't just cancel our booking." "Actually they can," I said calmly. "According to maritime law and company policy, bookings can be cancelled for various reasons, including irregularities in payment or documentation." "What irregularities?" Dad demanded, his businessman instincts kicking in. "We paid in full, we have all our documentation, we followed every procedure exactly." "You did," I agreed. "But there was one small detail you overlooked." "What detail?" Miguel asked, though his voice suggested he was beginning to understand that this wasn't a simple administrative error. "You booked your anniversary cruise on a ship that I own." The words fell into the lounge like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and disbelief that spread across my family's faces. "What?" Mom whispered. "Azure Seas Luxury Cruises," I explained, my voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside me. "I own the company. The SS Serenity, this beautiful ship you chose for your celebration, belongs to me." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ship's engines humming far below and the distant sound of other passengers settling into their cabins. "That's impossible," Dad said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? You spent months researching luxury cruise lines, looking for the perfect ship for Mom's anniversary celebration. You wanted the best no matter what it cost. Well, congratulations, you found it. You booked passage on one of the most exclusive cruise ships in the world. A ship that I purchased 3 years ago for $800 million. The number seemed to hit them like physical blows. Uncle Roberto, who had been silent until now, made a choking sound and set down his champagne glass with shaking hands. $800 million? Patricia repeated weakly. That's just for this ship. I also own the SS Tranquility and the SS Harmony. Azure Seas Luxury Cruises operates 12 ships total, but I only own the 3 flagship vessels. The other 9 are leased." Miguel was scrolling frantically through his phone. "Azure Seas Luxury Cruises, owned by Stellar Maritime Holdings." He stopped, staring at his screen. "Stellar Maritime Holdings is owned by Martinez Holdings LC," he read aloud, his voice cracking. "Which is owned by me," I confirmed. "Isabella Martinez, sole proprietor." The revelation seemed to suck all the air out of the room. My family stood frozen like figures in a wax museum, their champagne glasses forgotten, their anniversary celebration suddenly feeling very different. "But how?" Mom asked, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I'm very good at what I do," I said simply. "It turns out my little travel business has been somewhat more successful than you all assumed." "Travel business?" Sophia finally found her voice. "You said you worked in travel coordination." "I never said I worked in travel coordination," I corrected. "You all assumed I worked in travel coordination because I'm often traveling for business. I actually own luxury cruise lines." Dad was reading through the cancellation notice again, his business mind trying to process the legal implications. This says we have 24 hours to disembark at the next port. That's correct. We dock in Nassau tomorrow afternoon. You'll have 6 hours to arrange alternative accommodations and transportation back to Miami. But the money, Patricia said desperately. $800,000. We'll lose everything. You will, I agreed. According to the cancellation policy that you agreed to when you booked, there are no refunds for cancellations due to booking irregularities. What booking irregularities? Dad demanded, his voice rising with anger and desperation. I pulled out my phone and showed them the text message he'd sent me earlier. You told me there was no room for me on this cruise. That it was family only and I wasn't included. But you're not. Miguel started, then stopped, realizing how the sentence would end. I'm not what? Not family. Not important enough to include. Not successful enough to afford a luxury cruise. The questions hung in the air like accusations. I watched my family grapple with the reality of what they'd done. Excluded the owner of the ship from their celebration because they assumed she couldn't afford to join them. Isabella, Mom said, her voice breaking, we had no idea. How could we have known? You could have asked, I said simply. You could have shown interest in my actual business instead of dismissing it as a little travel job. You could have included me in family celebrations instead of assuming I couldn't afford them. We were trying to be considerate, Patricia said weakly. Were you? Or were you trying to feel superior? The question hit like a slap. Because there's a difference between consideration and condescension. Uncle Roberto finally found his voice. Isabella, surely we can work something out. This is a misunderstanding. We never meant to exclude you maliciously. Didn't you? You spent $800,000 to celebrate 35 years of marriage, and you deliberately excluded one of your children because you decided she wasn't worth including. That's not what happened, Dad protested, though his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? You texted me this morning to tell me there was no room for me on a ship that can hold 4,000 passengers. You told Miguel that the ship was fully booked when you have 24 people on a deck that can accommodate hundreds. I looked around at their shocked faces, these people who had spent years making assumptions about my life and my success. For 5 years, you've treated me like the family disappointment. Comments about my clothes, my lifestyle, my financial situation. Excluding me from expensive family events because you assumed I couldn't afford them. Making me feel like I didn't belong at my own family gatherings. The weight of 5 years of accumulated hurt was finally being lifted, and it felt both liberating and exhausting. What happens now? Mom asked quietly. Now you have a choice, I said. You can accept the cancellation, disembark in Nassau, and arrange your own transportation home. Or, I paused, watching their faces. Or you can stay on the ship, enjoy your anniversary celebration, and learn to treat me like an equal member of this family instead of a charity case. Yes, Dad said immediately. The second option. Absolutely. But, I continued, if you choose to stay, there are conditions. What conditions? Patricia asked nervously. No more assumptions about my finances. No more comments about my lifestyle or my clothes or my business. No more excluding me from family events because you think I can't afford them. Done, Miguel said quickly. Absolutely done. And one more thing, I said, looking directly at my parents. Next time you want to celebrate an anniversary, ask your daughter who owns luxury cruise ships if she might be able to help with the arrangements. Mom started crying in earnest now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Isabella, I'm so sorry. We're all so sorry. We never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me, I said, though not unkindly. 5 years of feeling like I didn't belong in my own family. 5 years of being treated like someone you had to protect from financial reality. I looked around at these people who had raised me, who had shaped me, who had spent 5 years making me feel small while I was quietly building an empire. The question is whether you're sorry enough to change. We are, Dad said, his voice breaking. Whatever it takes. We'll do whatever it takes. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Captain Morrison. Disregard the cancellation notices. The Martinez party will be staying for the full cruise. Your bookings have been reinstated, I said. Enjoy your anniversary celebration. As I turned to leave, Mom called out behind me. Isabella, wait. Where are you staying? What cabin are you in? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. I'm in the owner's suite on deck 18. It's the penthouse level, 12,000 square feet with a private deck and helicopter landing pad. Helicopter landing pad? Sophia whispered. Sometimes I like to arrive in style, I said. And sometimes I like to own the ship I'm traveling on. As I walked back toward the elevator, I heard the gentle murmur of conversation resuming behind me. My family trying to process everything they'd learned about the daughter they thought they knew. The elevator carried me back up to deck 18, to the owner's suite that occupied nearly a quarter of the ship's top level. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the lights of Miami fading as we headed out into the open ocean. For the first time in 5 years, I was exactly where I belonged, on my own ship, surrounded by my own success, finally free from the weight of my family's assumptions. Tomorrow we would dock in Nassau, and my family would have to decide whether they wanted to spend the rest of the cruise treating me as an equal or continue living with the knowledge that they had almost lost their anniversary celebration because they couldn't see past their own prejudices. Either way, the secret was out. They finally knew who their daughter really was and what she'd built while they weren't paying attention. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding what we'd lost on more honest foundations. The ocean stretched out endlessly before us, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was sailing toward something better rather than away from something painful. That felt like victory enough.